Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Stephen Sindoni is joining us last minute for a special treat on this Monday, March 26, 2012, special presentation of Truth Frequency. We were just joined by Mike Philbin. Free Planet is his blog spot. And right now we'll talk about John F. Kennedy and some information that Stephen has done some research on and brought to the table about the assassination plot and who was the one that actually pulled the trigger. So, Stephen, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for having me on what I'll call the spur of the moment.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for joining us at Spur of the Moment. I know you sent me this video. I was having a look at it. Is there a website that people can go to? Is it posted on your website?
Right now, I just initially posted on youtube.com/webflixguy, WEBFLIXSGUY, and I'll shortly put that on my StevensWorldTV.com site.
Okay, excellent. Tell us a little bit about it. It's called JFK Assassination Revealed.
Yes, I have been for a number of years very much like most people were, confused about the actual events surrounding the JFK assassination, and initially I, like most kids growing up in that area, wanted to become the President of the United States, and after that happened, I decided that I better be something else because that was a hazardous profession. And when I went home that day, my grandfather and I watched the 6 o'clock news later on during the evening, and we pretty much had an interesting take on it. He thought that it was a conspiracy, and my uncles, my father, and the next couple of days, everyone voiced their opinion on it, and they believed that it didn't happen the way they say it happened. And later on, as I got a little older, I started to look at the Warren Commission reports and started asking myself some of the questions about why there was so many botched attempts to secure the truth about it, and I realized that it had to be a cover-up.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And what have you found in your research?
Well, the first thing I decided to do, I decided I was going to look at the film that the driver might have been the shooter, and so I did. And I slowed the film frame down considerably more than what it was up on YouTube. And what I saw was something interesting. I saw what appeared to be something in the driver's left hand, which it was shiny, so it was hard to see with the sunlight. But upon reviewing it and slowing it down even further, what I noticed that he chucked something out of the limousine window. And it was silver or white. You'll be able to see it in the photo. It made me realize that if, in fact, he was the shooter, then he had to get rid of the gun. And it was pretty clear when I slowed down the frame an extra millisecond that I was able to see something going out the window. And as I read more about the report, the car slowed down almost to a stop and veered to the left. Well, if he took his left hand off the wheel and he fired the silver revolver at the president when he turned behind, then yes, the left hand was off the wheel, and then there was no steering for a second. And I realized that I was onto something.
Well, you know, I lived in Dallas for about 6 or 7 years, and we frequently went by the location, and I do agree that there's no way that Oswald pulled that off from the book depository. I mean, we've been up there many times.
Well, what you'll see in my movie, and I also show 2 Oswalds, and there were 2 Oswalds in the police station in Dallas that day. So through my research, I learned more that there was more than one Lee Harvey Oswald. They picked up 2, and I'll be in the coming months coming forward with more of my information that I've researched over that I can prove. And so that, and also I had a photo in the video there that I think you might have seen where the actual officer in the when they after arrested the fake Lee Harvey Oswald, who said he was the patsy, he was holding him by the waistband, so that way you'll see it in the photo that Jack Ruby could take the shot at him to kill him. So it's interesting how he was holding them there by the waist to make sure that Jack Ruby got that final shot, the murder shot, the kill shot, so to speak. So a lot of this stuff is interesting because you've got photos with George Herbert Walker Bush that was taken, a half hour after the assassination in Dealey Plaza, which he suggested he was in Tyler, Texas at a luncheon, but I haven't known anyone to be able to split the atoms. So basically, one of the stories is not true. So I have to believe the photographic evidence, and I have other evidence to prove that that is his photo there in Dealey Plaza. And there's a memo to Hoover and other things that I've acquired to see that there is a trail. And there were many, many people on that day who were in Dealey Plaza, including Richard Nixon, who had left earlier that day after they secured the location to make sure that, the executive action would be taken out. So this was definitely an executive action to kill the President of the United States, and many people were aware of it.
Well, that's very interesting that you pointed out the fact that he's being held by the waistband. I never noticed that before, and I'm looking at this picture, and it is extremely, extremely odd.
Well, I've had psychics look at it too, and you look at the people's eyes there in the photo, and it just appears that they all were aware that
they know what's going
Oswald was going to get killed.
They know what's happening. They don't look shocked at all.
Exactly. I bring this to your attention because for a number of years I've been saying, and I said it on another show I was on, and I'm a psychic intuitive. And for a number of years, I realized that I was going to see George Herbert Walker Bush in handcuffs. And there are very few people who would have the goods on him, and I would be the one to do it. And my psychic guides are telling me that I got to take him out because he's responsible for shattered dreams over the last 50 years. And most people don't realize what a conniver he's been. And he's got to come forward to answer the questions about Dealey Plaza that day. Why was he standing in front of that Texas book depository to answer these allegations and more?
I'm looking at the guy's face who is holding him by the waistband. I mean, that's very strange that you would hold a prisoner by the waistband. I've never heard of that in my life.
Well, unless he was gay and he was, wanted to see if that was a rock in his pocket, or he was happy to see him.
I've seen them do that with kids that are in boot camp.
Have you?
Yeah.
And it doesn't look like Oswald's in cuffs, is he?
Well, it doesn't appear to be. So if he's a prisoner, usually you handcuff somebody with his hands behind his back. But it appeared that he wasn't handcuffed there because he put up his hands like to guard or to block, the shot that was coming. So interestingly enough, through my research, Jack Ruby and that Oswald knew one another, and he had been seen in the club that Jack Ruby owned there in Texas. So there was association between the two of them. And that's another reason why they chose Jack Ruby to bump off the fictitious Lee Harvey Oswald, who called himself the Patsy, because he was not the real Lee Harvey Oswald. The real Lee Harvey Oswald was killed later that day. And I won't mention any of that today because in the coming months I will break the rest of this. But there were more than one Oswald. But the one that we see there, the infamous one, was not really Lee Harvey Oswald. He was a double, so to speak.
Well, I do remember a story or a YouTube video or something that I was reading that the guy standing in the window or in the door of the book depository wasn't actually Lee Harvey Oswald, and they actually identified who it was. But he looked very similar to him.
Yeah, there was another fellow who worked there who looked similar to him, but they were dressed differently that day. So there was a photo taken around 12:15 in front of the Texas Book Depository, which was of Lee Harvey Oswald outside. And they tried to say it was the other fellow, but the clothes didn't match. But there were eyewitnesses who saw Lee Harvey Oswald on the first and second floor around the time that the fatal shots were taken, where they couldn't place him on the sixth floor because he wasn't on the sixth floor.
Right.
What people did see, interesting, was eyewitnesses that they saw someone else in another window, a black man, who might have taken his shot. So it was interesting what people actually saw. I was going through all the eyewitness testimony, and an interesting thing you might find is a fellow by the name of Hugh Betzner. Have you heard of Hugh Betzner?
Briefly, but tell us about him.
Well, I called him today as well, but I'm going to read to you what he said on November 22nd of 1963. His name is Hugh William Betzner Jr., and he lived at 5922 Velasco in Dallas. He was 22 at the time. And what he said was he was standing on Houston Street near the intersection of Elm Street. You might know exactly where that is, being you've been there.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. He took a picture of President Kennedy's car as it passed along Houston. He had an old camera, and he looked down real quick and rolled the film to take the next picture. He then ran down to the corner of Elm and Houston Street, this being the southwest corner. He took another picture just as Kennedy's car rounded the corner. The car was just around the corner. He was standing back from the corner, and he had to take the pictures to some of the crowd. He ran onto Elm Street a little more, and President Kennedy's car was starting to go down the hill to the triple underpass. He was running to keep the president's car in his view, and he was winding his film as he ran. He was looking at his camera to see the number on the film as he ran. He took another picture of the president's car and was going down the hill on Elm Street. As he started to wind the film again, he heard a loud noise. He thought this noise was either a firecracker or a noise that had backfired. Here's the important part. He looked up, and it seemed like there was another loud noise in a matter of a few seconds. He looked down the street, and he could see the president's car and another one, and it looked like the car was stopped. Then he saw a flash of pink-like something, of pink-like someone standing up and then sitting back down in the car. And then he ran around so he could see over the back of the monument to the corner of Elm Street. He couldn't remember exactly where he was when a firecracker going off in the president's car. But his assumption was this was the president's car or the car behind his, and someone down in or one of those cars pulled out what looked like a rifle. He also remembers seeing what somewhere immediately around his car, in the president's car, before it sped under the underpass. Police and a lot of spectators started running up the hill on the opposite side of the street from one fence of the wood. He assumed that that's where the shot was fired from. He kept watching the car, and then when he came around the monument over to Main Street, he walked down towards the president's car, which had stopped. He saw a police officer and someone in plain clothes. He didn't know who they were. The officers and the man in the police clothes were digging around these officers were in plain clothes, were digging around in the dirt as if they were looking for a bullet. What he had seen was he saw a flash in the president's car, and he believed what he saw is one of the president's bodyguards pulled out a gun in the vehicle. What he had seen, these men that were digging for a bullet on the side of the road, was not digging for a bullet. They were looking for the gun that William Greer had thrown out of the president's limo after he shot the president. So what I called up Hugh Betzner today, and he's in Virginia right now. I was able to get his phone number, and I identified myself, who I was. I told him I was a researcher, and I told him I was looking at his statement, where he said in his statement that he had seen, after he heard the firecracker backfire, that one of the president's bodyguards pull out a gun. And I said, you were one of the few people who actually saw this and could come forward and prove that it was a conspiracy. So first thing he says is, well, I'm not doing any interviews right now. Who are you? And I told him who I was and where I want him to appear, what show. And then I said to him, I'd like to read you your statement, which I did, and told him where he had said he had seen one of the bodyguards in the president's limo turn around with a gun. And it says in his statement, he goes, well, I don't remember that. So I said, well, I know it was a long time ago, but are you going against what you said, at the time of the crime there? Because basically, you're lying to me now, what you're telling me now is not what you said on the record. You know, and I reminded him, I said, what you said was that you saw a nickel revolver in someone's hand in the president's car just before the car went underneath the underpass. I said, so which leads me to believe that a nickel revolver might have been the gun that was seen in slow motion in that footage that William Greer may have used to kill the kill shot for President Kennedy. And that's why those Secret Service men were looking on the side of the road not to find the bullet, but when you look at the video I just put up, you'll see something flying out of the passenger side of the limo and the driver threw out that was the gun.
Well, wouldn't Secret Service carry guns, and in the event that there's somebody shooting at them, wouldn't the natural reaction be to pull a gun out?
Yeah, but if you had one that was doctored specifically for the kill shot, you wouldn't want that to be found in the vehicle once you had to stop and pull up to Parkland Hospital, would you?
Right, right.
Well, there it is. There's your smoking gun.
Well, what frame is it that you're talking about in this film, which shows the gun in the limo driver's hand?
I don't have. I'm not looking at it right now, but it's between 320 and 330, I would think, is where you'll see it. You have to slow it up, and you'll see it.
Right, because I'm looking at it, and I've seen this footage before, and a lot of people have, and this came from the 80s when Bill Cooper was doing this, but everything was being circulated around VHS, so you didn't have the digital technology that you do now to be able to zoom in, slow down, and things like that. But a lot of people confuse the glare on the top of his head, on the top of the passenger's head, as a gun. But if you go forward a couple of frames and back a couple of frames, you'll see that it actually starts to move with his head. And back then they used to wear hair gel in their hair that would make their hair shiny like that.
Well, I can tell you, being a psychic intuitive, I've had guides come in and tell me that this is right on point. That's why they killed William Cooper Smith, because what he said was true and accurate. And there was shots fired from many locations, the grassy knoll for one. I also included a photo of the badge man who fired one of the shots that I believe hit Kennedy in the throat when he put up his hands to his throat. That was fired from the grassy knoll.
I agree with that. Yeah, there has to be shots coming from that area because, like I said, I've been there. I mean, I've examined it many, many, many times, and that's the only logical answer, that there were shooters from over there.
Now, another thing you can hear in the film I put up, I can hear 4 distinct shots. So if there were at least 4 shots, that does away with the one shooter. And it's interesting, when I talked to Hugh Betzner, one of the things he said to me is, I said, so what's your take on it? He said, 1 bullet. And I didn't ask him 1 bullet. I said, so what you're telling me is that dead men tell no tales, and that's the story that you're gonna share with me today. I said, I understand why you won't come forward and say any more than that, because I know they've scared the crap out of him, about all these years. But interesting, he lives in Virginia, not too far from Quantico, and they have him under wraps where he is, and pretty much, if he stays the course and he stays to that line, there's 1 bullet, he'll be able to enjoy his retirement because he's about 70 now.
Right.
And it was interesting that they took his camera away from him and they never gave it back to him. They just gave him the camera back without, the film whatsoever. They took everything. And most all of the witnesses who did come forward, Chris, all died mysteriously or never to be seen again. So it's kind of interesting that you come forward, you try to help, with an investigation, and next thing you know, you're never to be seen again. So that's kind of interesting in all that as well.
Right. Billy Nolan Lovelady is the man that they identified as being the one who was standing in the door.
Right, but when they asked him to come in with the same clothes on that he wore that day, he came in with a plaid shirt, not the shirt like Lee Harvey Oswald had. So it was obvious that he did have a resemblance to him, but the man that they photographed in the doorway was really Lee Harvey Oswald, and they didn't want to make that public because then that would have, taken away from the fact that maybe he wasn't on the 6th floor as they had claimed. An interesting thing as well, too, they had fingerprinted the Lee Harvey Oswald when they took him to the police station, but yet right after the impersonator Oswald, the fake Oswald, was killed, the FBI came to the funeral home where Lee Harvey Oswald was laid out, and they wanted to fingerprint him again, and they brought the gun with them. Now, if they already had his fingerprints, why would they come back with the rifle, to get his fingerprints?
Right.
Because they wanted to put the fingerprints after the fact. So if you understand that J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI, CIA, and other covert groups working along with the mafia were all involved in this, then you realize that it was definitely not a lone gunman who killed the President of the United States. Especially that I have more information that they were trying to kill Kennedy in a number of different places. The first hit was supposed to be in Chicago, and they didn't get him there because Kennedy got word that there was going to be an attempt on him, so he didn't go to Chicago. The next place they were going to hit him was in Florida. But Kennedy went to an Army-Navy football game, so they missed their opportunity there. So they set it up where they would get him in Texas. So that's how it ended up in Texas. It wasn't supposed to be in Texas. It initially was supposed to be done in Chicago.
Well, I know there were a lot of anomalies surrounding just the path that the vehicles were taking. They weren't supposed to take that particular path around Dealey Plaza. They were supposed to go straight through, but they circled around, and there was all kinds of weirdness going on.
There was an element of repeated attempts to sabotage him, to sabotage his security. They even told all the police officers not to surround him. So
well, that's exactly right. I mean, this was a coup d'etat, and there's a good movie out on that. People who want to, get into this and executive action, which Burt Lancaster played the leading role in Robert Ryan, but it pretty much is a unemotional type of cold-blooded act where they actually show how things are arranged when you're going to take out somebody of this magnitude and the scope of it, and how they can handle it with precision. And as I said, when you can't come forward to be a reliable eyewitness, and then next thing you know, you disappear, then it's pretty easy if the people that are investigating are part of the problem. And how do you become part of the solution? You end up, another dead body, so to speak.
Right. There was also an interesting exchange between Oswald and a reporter in the hallways of the Dallas Police Department. The reporter asked, "Did you shoot the president?" And Oswald said, "I work in that building." And the reporter said, "Were you in the building at that time?" And Oswald replied, "Naturally, if I work in the building, then yes, I'm in the building." Now, they supposedly found Oswald at a movie theater, which was several miles away. And the time that they found him versus the time that the shooting took place, it would be nearly impossible for him to make it to that movie theater.
Well, interestingly enough, I'm going to be doing a movie about this in the next couple of months, God willing, if I'm alive. But they were, and I have strong information that there were two Oswalds in the movie theater. And there's eyewitness testimony you can look up today, Chris, on it. One of the fellas' name was Butch Burroughs, who was the usher in the theater. Another his name is Brewer, who worked in a shoe store down the street. But one Oswald shows up at the theater at 1 o'clock. He buys a ticket, goes into the theater, and Butch Burroughs, who was a concession man, saw him coming in. 15 minutes later, Oswald comes over and buys popcorn and goes back and sits in the main part of the theater. At 1:35, now at 1:15, at the time he was getting popcorn, Officer Tippett was getting shot about, say, 10 blocks away, possibly. And they were trying to say Lee Harvey Oswald had shot him and then ran from there to the theater. But at 1:35, a Brewer, who worked in a shoe store a couple of doors away from the Texas Theater, had seen what appeared to look like Lee Harvey Oswald fidgeting, and then the man ran into the Texas Theater, did not buy a ticket, and if he had gone into the main level of the theater, he would have had to pass Butch Burroughs. But Butch never saw him. But what Butch heard was someone coming into the theater doors, but he assumed that they went up on the balcony and they went up on the upper level because they weren't on the main floor of the theater, because they would have had to. So a couple minutes after that, Brewer came into the theater and said to Butch Burroughs, by the way, do you realize someone snuck in the theater? He goes, yeah, I heard something, but I didn't see them. Well, right after that, Brewer, who was outside, had seen the police come. And the police went into the theater, and there was a scuffle, and they took out the Oswald, who was on the lower level, out of the front door. Brewer walked around to the back of the Texas Theater, and he saw another man that looked like Lee Harvey Oswald that was put into a police car that was escorted away from the rear. His testimony was never, ever really investigated, and he couldn't figure out, well, wait a minute, I just saw them take out Lee Harvey Oswald from the front door. How am I seeing an identical guy being taken out from the rear?
Right, right.
So this is interesting testimony. So I look at the testimony, and then my guides come in, and then I learn a little bit more about the information about who was actually there in Dealey Plaza. So I'm going to be writing a movie about what I believe really happened and how the National Security Agency was involved in this. And they had sent spotters down there, or observers down there, if you will, to be able to watch the execution of John Kennedy. And what was supposed to happen is that if the lone bullet theory didn't fly, they were going to make it look like it was blacks, it was hippies, and a conspiracy of people, Cubans and a mafia, as a concerted effort to take away the focus that it was an executive action taken out by our executive branch of our government.
Ah.
Now, here's the why. Let me give you the why this is important. The reason why Kennedy was taken out was a number of reasons, but the main reason was he was going to pull out all the troops in Vietnam by 1965.
Right.
Why is that important? Because Allen Dulles and George Bush Sr. had set up the Crescent Triangle drug network in that Asia area with Bhumibol Adulyadej of Thailand, which is Barack's father. And they were going to set up this drug network so that way they could sell drugs all over the world, and they could make all the kids in America drug addicts. And when Kennedy got wind of that, he wasn't going to allow them to have all our children, myself and all the other kids at that time, become drug addicts at the expense of George Herbert Walker Bush and Allen Dulles.
Wow.
And the reason I am so sure of this is because when I was getting drafted to go to Vietnam, and I was lucky enough not to go, my friends coming back told me that their main job in Vietnam was guarding the poppy fields.
Of course, of course. And they were bringing heroin back inside of the bodies of dead soldiers.
We've had a CIA-run government since JFK died.
That's exactly right. So when you understand, and Kennedy was going to, his brother Robert was going to personally dismantle the FBI, get rid of Hoover completely, and his underhandedness, the CIA and the NSA. And Hoover hated Kennedy because they knew, even though Hoover had things on Kennedy, his affairs and stuff like that, Hoover was a flaming gay, he was a cross-dresser. Transvestite. His lover was Alan Tolson, who was his advisor for many years in the FBI. And recently,
we've got pictures of that. So
yeah, recently you could watch the movie with Clint Eastwood, where he would only hire people that were like gay to become officers in the FBI. So it was known that the OSS, which was from Germany, ended up becoming the CIA. And all the officers, FBI or CIA, were usually people that were gay or people that were loners, and they wouldn't want family men, and so they could control and manipulate. But this was something where, like with Hoover, he knew that it was over because Kennedy was making sure Robert was having him report to him, and he didn't like the idea that he would have to turn over his files and all the secrets that he had uncovered over the last 40 or 50 years, and even how he got his job. And how he undermined his boss, A. Palmer. And there was even the Lindbergh kidnapping, the baby, was staged by Herbert Hoover so that way they could get the fingerprinting law enacted. And that's why people are being fingerprinted because he had to scare the bejesus out of the American people to sign the bill that would allow fingerprinting to begin.
Stephen Sindoni, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a quick break and we'll wrap it up on the other side right here on truthfrequencyradio.com. Special thanks to everybody tuning in this Monday, March 26, 2012, for this special presentation of Truth Frequency. And we may do these special broadcasts every once in a while. We do have our regular show Thursdays, 9 o'clock Central. Well, I should say Saturdays, 10 o'clock Central. Then we have our Thursday show, which we try to do at least twice a month, if not all 4 Thursdays out of the month. But make sure you check truthfrequencyradio.com regularly. Right in the front, underneath the slider, we'll be posting show updates and things like that. So be sure to check that pretty frequently. Stephen Sindoni is joining us. We're talking about JFK. We're going to wrap it up here in a few minutes. But Stephen, what is your website one more time?
It's Stephen's World TV, Stephen'sWorldTV.com, or youtube.com/WEBFLIXSGUI, or youtube.com/SINDONIPRODUCTIONS Productions.
Excellent, excellent. And I think this is pretty fascinating research into the JFK conspiracy. I don't know if I agree with it all, but I'm going to definitely have a look at it and see if anything you bring to the table changes my mind. The part that I have a hard time seeing is the driver with the gun in his hand, but it is all in the eye of the beholder, I think.
Well, I'm going to throw a little tidbit here, a little caveat. There's a man by the name of Phil Oakes. He was what they call a folk singer for the CIA. He was sent to Dealey Plaza Assassination. And if you look him up, basically they said that he suicided in 1976. But before he died, he wrote about the recoilless gun, what he called a shellfish toxin that was in the chamber that William Greer had used to kill Kennedy in the car. And being that Phil had worked for the NSA, he was taken out, and it made it appear like a suicide. And that'll be in my upcoming book and movie regarding the other side coming back to tell their story.
I've heard about that. And one of the anomalies surrounding the JFK assassination is the fact that they, quote unquote, lost the brain. Had they not lost the brain, I think a lot of these answers would be apparent.
Well, exactly right. And then the entry and the exit wounds were changed. Even in the report from former President Ford, he claimed that the entry was like 5 inches lower, so that way the report would stand on the single bullet theory. Just like when I talked to Hugh Betzner, and he brought in, well, it was a single bullet. Like I didn't ask him about the single bullet. So you have to understand, if you listen to the soundtrack that I just put up, you'll hear distinctively 4 shots. And they kind of proved that from the window, the shooter with the rifle didn't have enough time to get off that many rounds. So if that would be the case, and there was at least 4 shots or more that's heard on the audio that I put on that JFK assassination, that everyone would pretty much have to agree that it had to be more than one person.
Right. Yeah, no, I do totally agree with that. There's no way. Like I said, I've been there before. But what's funny is they close off the area. And supposedly in the museum, which is the book depository, the area is closed off, so you can't get to the window to see the actual view that Oswald had. They have a big glass around it. And I think that's to keep people from speculating and saying, you know what, there's no way that he was able to do it from this angle.
Well, it's interesting. When I first started to research this a couple years ago, they cut the brake lines on the car and they took a shot at me. And then when I contacted a couple of people regarding it, they got closer. I was getting threatened. So Bush was very nervous back in 2007-8 when I first started to look at this, especially when I went to the museum in New York City, the Music Museum, to research the life of Phil Oakes. I was now being followed on a regular basis. So I knew I was onto something. And then when Phil Oakes himself, I got some guidance where to look. I was able to contact friends of his, family, and start getting things. Even his sister, Sonny Oakes, right after he died, mysteriously her house burns down and she loses her job. So a lot of things just don't jive. And George Herbert Walker Bush has been responsible for things since the early 30s or 40s, which I will go into more. And as a matter of fact, I'll give you a bombshell. His real name is George Scherff Jr. He was born the immigrant son of George Scherff, who was the accountant for Nikola Tesla. And he was the Curious George in the stories, because the story started because Nikola Tesla said little George used to snoop around his laboratory, and he gave him the name Curious George, and he told these playwrights about it, and they end up writing a play, Curious George, based on George Herbert Walker Bush, who was really George Scherff Jr., the son of the accountant who I just mentioned. Huh.
I've never heard that before. I'm going to have to look into it.
Well, there's a guest you might want to bring on. His name is Eric Orion, and you can look up the bushconnection.com. Eric's a friend of mine, and when I first put the story up in 2007, they tried to have me killed. And they tried to kill Eric, too, because, the Nazi-Bush connection goes all the way back, and his story is a very damning one. And I knew when I put it up, and it put my life in jeopardy and the people that were around me in jeopardy, I realized that Bush had a lot to lose if this, stayed in the public eye.
Right,
because he's the second president of the United States to be elected without being a naturalized born citizen. The first being him, George Scherff Jr., the son of George Scherff, a German immigrant, and the second being Barack Obama, who's really Prince Sudhuyadej of Thailand.
Huh. I'm going to have to look into that, definitely. We're running out of time, though, unfortunately. Anything you want to leave the audience with?
Well, I'd like to leave the audience with open your eyes and realize that you've been had all these years, and make these gentlemen and ladies in Washington accountable, because that is where the problem lies.
Very well said. We really appreciate your time. And your websites one more time.
My website is stevensworldtv.com, STEPHENSWORLD TV.com, and youtube.com/WEBFLIXSGUY, and youtube.com/ my last name, SINDONI Productions, PRODUCTIONS. And I thank you for your time, Chris.
Oh, thank you very much for the great information, Stephen. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for tuning in. Be sure to tune in. We're going to try to do a show for you this Thursday, 9 o'clock Central, and of course, every Saturday, 10 o'clock Central, without fail. And we love you all. Kiss the one you love right now, because you never know when the last time is going to be.